Hi, it's Lisa here, and I want to talk about sovereignty today. It really is the most important inquiry, and it's one of those inquiries that has the capacity to release us from the illusion, let's say, and discover our true nature. So the reason it's a hot topic for me right now is because I had written a post on Facebook, and the contents of the post aren't important for my discussion here, but it was controversial and both well received and well received, as in many people could resonate with what I was sharing, and then other people were upset and didn't agree and didn't resonate, and that's fine. But one of the things that I appreciated was there were several levels of inquiry that I noticed arising on the discussion threads of this post. And one of them is an inquiry around sovereignty, as in, what is it? It's a very good question. What is sovereignty? And how does that relate to unity? Because we have this tendency to classify, or there's a general tendency to classify sovereignty into me, selfishness, just thinking, just like limiting reality to one person. If we think about sovereignty as the capacity to be our own authority, so personal sovereignty, would be, I'm the authority of myself. I get to make the decisions without influence or coercion from an outside source. Then the linear way of thinking already starts to go, well, there's me and there's the outside source. So that sounds great to be sovereign, but what happens if that outside source has valuable information and you need to hear that? These are all good questions. So then it becomes like, well, sovereignty sounds great as I'm in control of myself, but how does that flesh out in being responsible and showing up for someone else or the whole of the cosmos, These have been burning questions along my path. It's a particularly important inquiry for me because as a teacher who shares a particular way to investigate the inner environment, sovereignty means to me that I am honoring continually the fact that you are your own authority, and we are cultivating that as we go. And what that means, there's I can't cover the whole topic, obviously, because it feels vast, and there are multiple angles with which to discuss sovereignty and how that is related to the unity experience or oneness. So I do want to share the simplicity of what I found and how that relates to my work. So ultimately, what I'm sharing as a teacher is not an ideology at all. It's not a way of thinking or a way of being, how you have to be or how you have to think. It's not that. It is a method for the continual awareness and honoring of what arises in the inner environment. So, for example, as I'm talking and sharing, you can be feeling your physical sensations, your emotions, your thoughts. I tend to have the background of all that sensory information. I like to bring in what's completely unsensory or without senses. Sometimes that can appear as stillness. Sometimes people call it emptiness or the absolute. It can be black, like a deep black void. But it shows the contrast between the sensory information and what is completely still and void of sensory information. You know, when there's a separation between those elements within, there's some level of suffering. But what is suffering? Suffering actually seeds itself from the lack of capacity to know what we are in any given moment or situation. So when that deep blackness or the stillness and the sensory experience start to come together, that suffering moves into coherence. And it does that through the discovery that the only thing keeping those elements apart is me, or a sense of me there. So by definition, for them to come together, there needs to be an awakening of what I am in that situation. And it's the awakening of what I am that sheds light on what sovereignty is over and over. Because if sovereignty is, if we can speak about it as being our own authority, then the question is, well, what are you? What are you? What is it to be the authority over yourself? There has to be clarity around what you are in order to preserve that, or in order to move from that. So I like the word sovereignty, but what I've noticed just working with people and in my own process over time is that sovereignty is really cultivated in the way that I just described, the continual awakening to what am I, what am I, what am I, and the revelations there. So I began to, as the building response to what am I emerges, that response is a visceral experience of an essential quality, or essential qualities, I should say, that I call uniqueness. So the more that uniqueness is revealed, the more clarity comes as to what sovereignty is. Because you can experience uniqueness viscerally and somatically, spatially, in relationship to your body and in relationship to other aspects of yourself. Part of the exploration of sovereignty, when you go in and start asking, well, what is it that's making the decisions? What is it that's guiding me? What is governing me? And who am I in relationship to that? The responses are always changing, and it's depending on where you are in your own journey, right? And sometimes the question of what is me leads to many experiences of me. So if I have multiple experiences of me within my inner space, and then someone or something noticing those various aspects of me, well, what is sovereignty? How can I be my own authority if there are multiple aspects of me there. And if my environment is resonant, if my outer environment is going to be resonant and reflective of my inner environment, how can I know what's me outside if I don't actually have a coherent sense of me on the inside? So the continual investigation of what is me is important to this exploration around sovereignty. And there comes a point when the inner environment comes into cohesion or coherence around this inquiry, right? So that the many me's kind of conglomerate and the essence is revealed, or the essence of all of those me's. So the common thread between the young child me, the mother maiden crone, the father, son, Holy Spirit, all the different aspects of me, they're the common thread between and amongst them that reveals itself through inner inquiry is essence. And when that essence makes itself apparent, then it becomes clear. Oh, this is the governing entity that belongs here to this space. So the inner environment starts to come into coherence. And then there's more of an exploration, or the exploration of inner and outer is more available. So once that is there, and maybe you can, if you're listening to me and you're feeling yourself and you're referring to yourself primarily and hearing me and receiving me secondarily, then that means that you're in touch with what's happening with you and putting focus on you as the authority over yourself, so that I don't become your authority just by me talking to you or sharing what's arising for me. Just like in my Facebook post, sharing what's arising for me is not meant on my part to put you in a position of me having the authority over you. The invitation is, can I hold and be in what feels like me, even if that's a moving inner space and a transformative inner space? Can I be with me first, primarily, as I receive what someone else is sharing? Then we start to move more into, okay, well, how does sovereignty relate to unity? Because being a sovereign being means having an awareness of what feels like self, or a unique vibration, a unique expression of the creation that wants to fulfill itself within the creation, right? It's our responsibility to fulfill an aspect of creation within the creation. But does that mean that I do that in a way that is not receiving what's coming from the outside? No. As soon as as I'm grounding in myself and holding that as the primary experience, then I can receive what's coming from someone else. And then that moves more into the investigation of inner and outer. And is there any separation between the inner space and the outer space? If we're working with polarities. I'm cold. I need to get my blanket.
Alert from calendar. Ember.
Sorry about that. So, so then, inevitably, what I've found is as you keep going and working with polarities and integration, then the next inquiry becomes, well, what's me and what is the other person in relationship to the other person from which I'm receiving information, or group of people. It can be one person or it can be the whole collective. Right now, the collective is hot, with the pandemic and all of the political stuff that's happening in the U.S. right now. I'm very aware of all of the information that's available there. And so the inquiry can be, okay, what is me and what is it? And eventually, in an integrative practice, it's not even that we're trying to integrate. It's simply accepting and allowing, as we continually refer to our inner experience and notice any separation that's happening there, in acceptance. So acceptance, allowance of the various qualities and aspects that appear, and the honoring of anything that's keeping them separate will naturally start to bring them into coherence. And so when you're working with inner and outer, the same thing happens. Me versus other. We start to, in the consciousness, the unification begins to occur. And the way that I talk about that is the union of uniqueness and oneness, so that there's no separation in space between me and the other, whether that's a single other or multiple people that feel like other and outside, or the world. There's no separation in my consciousness between me and other, and yet there is still distinction between the uniqueness of the constellation of this entity and other entities. For me, that's when we start to move into sovereign unity. A sovereign unity is actually a phrase that one of my friends uses, and it corresponds to what I'm calling uniqueness and oneness, like this marriage of uniqueness and oneness. When the merging happens, then it becomes easier. Sovereignty is a subjective state of being, right? So it's hard to talk about it as in sovereignty looks like this, because it can look different in each moment, depending on the person and the situation and where each of us are in our own spiritual evolution, right? That should be honored. So whatever each person's experience of sovereignty is at the moment needs to be honored in order for that to then cultivate itself. But ultimately, the point that I have gotten to in my own exploration is that there's a clear experience internally of the uniqueness of this entity, let's say. And the reference to that, or the full expression of that, leaves no room to be governed by anything else. And yet, there's a recognition within that uniqueness that the stuff of the other is made of the same thing. So even though the organization might be different, we're of the same substance. And in that case, it's easy for me to honor the uniqueness that appears here and the uniqueness that appears in someone else or a group. So sovereign unity in the end looks like the authority here is clear and grounded within, inherent within itself. And there's an honoring of the other being in that space as well, recognizing that there's no space between us. So we're inhabiting the same space. We are we are within the same space and connected. So in that way, I'm responsible to myself, the same that I'm responsible to the other, because we're made of the same material. There's no way I can't be. And yet there's a different dance moving here than over there, for example. If I start to go into ideologies and theories, it just doesn't, I can go off into tangents and get lost and feel overwhelmed at this discussion, because the possibilities for discussing how it fleshes out is endless. So it's much more simple for me to come back to the subjective experience. And having worked with people on this, everyone that I've worked with can have their own subjective experience of what they are. And the more understanding and revealing of what they are occurs, the sovereignty is a natural side effect, being your own governor. So one of the specific inquiries, there's actually two that I want to mention, that I've noticed elucidates this theme within the self is, what am I? What is other? So, or within my experience right now, is there anything that feels like there's not me? It's not me. And just asking the question, I always refer to the physical experience, as which is different than like thinking, oh, is there something around? I feel into my body or whomever I'm working with, and I have a feeling sense of anything in my field that feels like it's not me. Those experiences of not me tend to influence what is me, so that I'm now making decisions in a way that isn't completely sovereign, because I don't recognize that there's an influence there. But the key is not the influence. So the key is not trying to get rid of that thing or fight with that thing or blame that thing. It's an opportunity to look at, well, what is it engaging with? What is me? When that thing that's not me is there, and it can be, when you ask the question, or when you start to sense into what's not me, the qualities of what's not me can be a whole range of things. It can be another person, some kind of what feels like an astral entity, like a parasitic entity. It could be another aspect of yourself that you feel like is not you. And then through the investigation of, oh, okay, so there's the thing that's not me, then what am I? What am I? And keep coming back to yourself. As you do that in the acceptance and allowance, and then the nature takes its course and allows the merging, what's not me that reveals itself in phases until suddenly it's completely clear as to what's not me and what is me. And when that clarity comes in, there's a solidifying, or I shouldn't say solidifying, a clarity appears around sovereignty and what that means, especially in relationship to the situation that where in which the influence is active, So what is me? What's not me? A lot of people, empaths especially, this is a very important inquiry because empaths are often feeling other people or the collective and not recognizing that what they're feeling is not what's happening within their own entity. It is what's happening in someone else. So if I'm feeling what's happening in someone else and I don't have an awareness around that, it could potentially affect the decisions that I make for me. Because I'm feeling like what's happening is me and mine and informing me. So that's an example of where the sovereignty and the unity start to become like a gray, confusing area. And then sovereignty isn't clear. The path of sovereignty isn't clear. Which is another way of saying that my uniqueness or the uniqueness of what is happening here isn't clear. And so the expression of that uniqueness is muddled, limited, somehow obscured. There will be some suffering in the expression of that, or simply lack of coherence. So that's one major inquiry, is what am I? What's me, what's not me? Another major inquiry is the exploration of will. Will means personal will and divine will up to a certain point. So what is it that is deciding? What is it that's making the decision? What is the inner authority, let's say? Like, I have authority over myself. Well, what is that? Are there two of us? Is there an authority and then there's me? Do I feel like the authority that's directing the rest of me? Those are really rich inquiries. Usually what happens is within somewhere along that line, and the question is, what is moving? What's moving me? What compels me? What is it that drives desire? What is it that's desiring a particular experience or a particular thing? Usually God comes into the equation, whatever God is, the cosmos, goddess, like the ultimate authority. However you experience the ultimate authority, and the constant return to that inquiry of what is me and what is that ultimate authority? How are we engaging right now? What is the relationship between us? That one is another important one because it's the same inquiry, but it's like a specific one that kind of pulls you up Jacob's ladder. Because the eventual realization is there is no separation between me and a higher authority. But usually what happens within us is that we subjectively experience a separation. So it can be me and God, or me and the cosmos, or me. But it's like, what is the inquiry can show up differently in different dimensions of the evolutionary path. Right now, for me, for example, the way that I'm inquiring into that, where I am in myself, is what is organizing this? What is it that drives the movement and creates the thoughts and the desires and what organizes this, not just the space of my body, my organs, what creates the quality of my tissues? What is it that is organizing the space? It's kind of like the greater organizing factor that applies to both the me of this body and this space and the space around me. It's a unifying factor between us. So you notice that it's important to me, and it came up for me when I shared this thing on Facebook. Like, it's important to me in my dharma to point out that I'm not sharing answers. That's one of the things that about the whole subject of spiritual teacher that's very important to me is I'm not sharing answers. I'm sharing questions, actually, inquiries, or, pointing things out, offering a framework for you to continually refer to what's happening within you so that you become the trust in yourself builds, the substance of your true nature builds, and the more expression, the more that builds and begins to express itself, sovereignty and being your own authority is a natural side effect of that. And sometimes I can get a little just upset when there's not a basic agreement on that between me and whoever I'm engaging with, even if it's people that I don't, that are kind of wider in my circle and might be reading something that I'm sharing and haven't had access to my work. So that feels good to clarify again now, especially in relationship to that particular thread. Let me just see if there's anything else that I want to share on this subject. Yeah, maybe I will talk a little bit more about my own experience of that Facebook post and in relationship to the inquiry of sovereignty and unity, or uniqueness and oneness together. So the way that I have been exploring myself in relationship to that thread is I had something arise in me that felt like it wanted expression through that avenue of a Facebook post. So I was very clear in the message, the inner qualities of the frequencies or the spirit that wanted to be shared, and the words matching that spirit felt exact to me. So it was good. to have that expression, and it was very clear. It was when I put it out there and then I saw the responses to that, then I heard the responses and listened to myself as I received the responses. And what happens in that case is I can be informed about what wants to transpire in the consciousness here, fully receiving what is being offered, whether that's supportive or resonant, or whether that's dissent or a different opinion or anger or whatever. I can receive that through the experience of my own sovereignty, so that I can listen and be informed and allow it to change me, allow my consciousness to change and adjust based on what I'm hearing. And it can take time, so I think I made that post 10 days ago, and I'm still like listening to the field. It's still kind of at a low low hum. So I'm still listening, and the changes that occur in me responding to that post might not be the appropriate way that those changes want to express themselves. So this is how it's like I'm in my own process of further unifying inner and outer, and being fully open and also very clear in what I am. So I've also brought into my inquiry within that the things that I mentioned. What is me, what is not me, and what is the I'm feeling it, but the words aren't coming yet. What is the driving intelligence? What is it that's intending me and the movement of me and the expression of me? And how is that related? What's the unifying experience of that and the people who responded to that post, for example? And the feedback that I got outside that post, that based on that post too. So that's the practical way, like a practical example of putting into practice what I just shared in the video. Yeah, I guess that feels complete for me at the moment. I feel honored to navigate this territory together with others. I feel humbled to be fully available for that in myself as well. And I look forward to the continuation of that and walking with you or people on this journey. So thank you.